Today's video is sponsored by Bambu Lab, the leading global manufacturer of desktop 3D printers. In my last video, I shared the various reasons why I had to abandon my first boat, the one I had originally planned to live on full-time. I ended that video on a positive note, explaining that despite the setbacks, we're still living on the water, just on a different boat. In today's video, I want to continue along that thread and walk you through the key things I looked for in this new boat to avoid repeating the same mistakes and ensure a better living experience. I'll also highlight some of the crucial elements and decisions that helped me turn this vessel into a home I can truly see myself living in for the long haul. So when I was looking for a new boat, the main thing I cared about was the size of the living area I'd be able to have eventually. Maybe this stems from the trauma of living in a small boat for so long, but I've come to realize that I feel most comfortable when I'm not too cramped inside my living space. And so, when it comes to finding boats of the right size, I'd like to share a little secret about actual usable interior space on a boat. It's not the length that matters most, it's the width. Width gives you the flexibility, for example, to have cabins on both sides with a corridor in the middle, or to create one large open space. And so, our 40-foot steel cruiser had plenty of length, but with a maximum width of just 3.5 meters, that's less than 12 feet, it simply wasn't wide enough to divide the space into multiple cabins. This largely contributed to the cramped feeling I mentioned in my previous video. Now, to maximize the width inside the living area of the barge boat, I even sacrificed having a proper gangway around the boat as it would have taken up too much interior space. Instead, I designed it so that just half of a shoe can fit, which is enough for me to access it when needed. The next factor I would like to mention was more of a coincidence thanks to the unique design of the new barge boat, which had a solid deck on top of a relatively shallow hull. This raised the floor of the living space by about 60 centimeters or around 2 feet above the waterline. This setup makes it much easier to keep the cold out and the heat in. In contrast, the floor of our barracks boat is located just below the waterline, and we notice a big difference in how cold the floor would get even if the boat is generally well insulated. Of course, one could install floor heating, but in my opinion, it's always best to start with the most favorable conditions right from the start. Speaking of heating, one of the main reasons to have a boat of appropriate size is so you can install a proper wood stove or a sophisticated floor heating system. Powerful and reliable heating setups are usually heavy and take up a lot of space, something you simply can't fit into a relatively narrow weekend cruiser like my first boat. The final element I want to talk about today, before giving you an update on the progress of the barge boat, is what I believe to be the second most important factor after width, and that's the ceiling height. I've been inside countless boats, and I'm talking mainly about the fixer-upper kind of boats, so usually some older models. These all seem to have one thing in common: the ceiling height almost never exceeds around 2 meters or about 6 feet, even on most larger models. Of course, this is done to ensure boats can pass under bridges and to minimize the surface area exposed to strong winds. So when I planned the size of my new boat, I started by determining the maximum height I could have while still being able to pass under bridges. So I checked the lowest bridge in and around Berlin and set the ceiling height accordingly. This gave us a ceiling height of around 2.6 meters after insulation. It makes the space feel much bigger, and instead of feeling like you're on a boat, it's more like a loft apartment, which is exactly the effect I wanted to achieve. Once I had set these parameters for my new boat, I could then decide how to divide the interior space. Again, for me, the perceived space is the most important factor, and I wanted to create the largest possible open area, so I condensed the kitchen, bathroom, storage and utilities into a space that takes up less than 10% of the entire cabin. Now, I hope you found these tips useful, especially if you're looking for a boat yourself, and I'll be sharing more of the things I've learned over the years in future videos, and of course, I'll also give you a proper tour of my current boat in due time. But for the rest of today's video, I'll give you some updates on various projects happening on the barge boat. First up, we've improved and finalized the water system. This is the second water system I've built from scratch on a boat, and while it's an improvement over the one I installed on my first boat, it's still far from perfect. From my experience, the main difficulty with a water system is making sure all the components work well together. For example, I had to go through 3 different water pumps and 3 different gas water heaters before I found a combination that kinda works. However, before we get to the water system, let's quickly finish the kitchen countertop, which you might remember was missing in one of my recent videos. And since this isn't anything particularly boat specific, I'll just skim over it briefly. The only part that might be interesting is how we cut away the thickness of the plate from the 2 beams in my newly built kitchen module to make it fit perfectly in between. But aside from that, I'll just show you the finished result. As you can see, it fits pretty well with the overall color scheme of the kitchen so far. And with that, let's turn our attention back to the water system. You might remember that I specifically built a service cabinet behind the kitchen and bathroom. Initially, I planned to use the entire height of the cabinet for the water system, but later I decided to only use the bottom section to keep the upper part for much needed storage. Here, I've already installed the on-demand gas water heater. This one has an exhaust outlet, and that's where the problems began. At least with this unit, I had a lot of trouble getting it to run for more than just a few seconds at a time. It kept overheating even though I had a very short exhaust pipe leading directly to the outside, which is what I'm setting up here. To make a long story short, I eventually had to cut open the board directly above the water heater, install an electric exhaust fan, and in the end, swap out the gas water heater altogether because I just couldn't get this one to function properly. Luckily, these things are based on very simple technology and they're all pretty much the same size and shape, so I was able to reuse the exhaust outlet I'm installing here for the new unit. And so here's my initial installation. The exhaust fan and other modifications will be added later. Alright, for the installation of the actual water system, I'm not going to show everything in exact chronological order because there was a lot of back and forth, plenty of trial and error, and as I mentioned before, it still doesn't work perfectly. So I'm just going to walk you through the different elements I installed to give you an idea of what this system consists of, starting with the freshwater pump. For our build, there were 3 key factors to consider: water pressure, flow rate, and the noise level of the pump. Since our pump is installed directly in the living area, the noise level is a major factor for overall comfort. The one you see here is actually the 3rd pump I've installed over the past few weeks, and it's by far the most quiet one we could find. I built this little box to further reduce the noise, but it doesn't actually make much of a difference. Next is a very simple 3-stage filtration system. The key here is to regularly change the filters as they can clog up and prevent the system from functioning properly. Next we have a fairly sophisticated water purification tube. This has a powerful UV light inside that silver tube, which kills off any remaining microorganisms that might make it through the filtration system. Alright, the final element I want to discuss today is this little pressure ball. Inside it has a flexible membrane that allows you to pump air into it, creating a constant pressure throughout the system, which helps to reduce any pulsing effect that might come from the water pump. This turned out to be one of the most crucial components in this system, allowing it to function at all. For our water pipes, I prefer using these 15mm rigid tubes. These have proven to be very durable and easy to install as they don't require hose clamps. With a variety of adapters, they've allowed me to fully customize my water system. To organize the pipes, I use these 15mm hose clamps, which I 3D printed with the Bambu Lab A1 3D printer, today's video sponsor. With this, I basically have an unlimited supply of clamps, so there's no excuse not to arrange the pipes neatly wherever I can. To make them, I simply downloaded a file from MakerWorld, a free online database for 3D printable items. The A1 completely blew me away with how easy it is to use and the amazing print quality it delivers straight out of the box. After running some initial test prints, I was amazed at how clean and flawless these results were right from the start. This is because the A1 handles everything on its own. It calibrates, prepares, and even cleans itself. Next, I wanted to see how well it performs when printing with two different filaments simultaneously. I chose this little fidget ring, and to my astonishment, the part came out nearly perfect. It was spinning straight off the printer bed. Another item I regularly print are these mounting brackets for Wago wire clamps, allowing me to screw them down securely. I also 3D printed some adapters to build a custom extruder fan assembly. To learn more, click the link in the description.